wasn't official, but I might have had to go down there just to use the chairs and chairs and stuff. And sunset, we went down there.
All right, so good morning. How is everybody? Tired here? All right, bring that out there. Okay, so we need to finish talking about strategy. Apparently, when I launch the presentation, the slideshow, it shows up on the right screen, and the left screen has the PowerPoint presentation with the detail on it, and I can't figure out how to get them to flip and minimize one, so I apologize for not having that done. I need the right screen to be able to watch something else, so this is going to be a little wonky today because they've done something to the monitors and it's not all working completely as it should. So last time we were talking about marketing strategy and goals. By the way, I used all these wipes to sanitize these ducks because I told you that I was going to pass out ducks for those of you who are here. For those of you that are in the extended class, you can continue to text me. Again, my phone number, and I'm going to tell you all this as well. You should write it down. I prefer to text. I receive a voluminous amount of email every single day because I've had my email account here since I was a graduate student. Like, I get a ton of junk email into it, and so it's easier if you just text me. My number is area code 405-414-7054. So those of you who are in the extended class, you are welcome to text me. The reason I'm using the right screen monitor is I'm going to attempt to monitor the live chat sessions for those of you that are watching it on YouTube and not on WebEx. So I know at least one student was having problems because they're not in country and couldn't text me. So I'm going to try and monitor the live chat session. So it's a brave new world with all this technology and trying all this different stuff. So we talked about what it is. I think we got through what is a good goal, right? We talked about your goals to make this individualistic. Just to sort of a recap. So what is a good goal? Just as a recap for those of you who may not have been here. It should be specific and objective. So you could have a specific goal that's not objectively going to be able to be quantifiable, right? You could have the specific goal of, I want to be able to uncover and prove or disprove the existence of God by the end of this semester. And I think I told you all that one of the things that interested me as a younger person in philosophy and theology was whether or not you could prove or disprove the existence of God. And so I took a lot of philosophy courses. I've heard all of the philosophical arguments for the existence of God, and none of them are terribly satisfying. And so I don't know that we're ever going to get to that point. Maybe at some point in the future we would get to the point where we could prove or disprove the existence of God. Certainly not going to be able to do it by the end of this semester. And so, although that's specific, because we don't have objective criteria in order to fundamentally establish the existence or non-existence of God, that's probably not a good goal. It's got to be measurable. You've got to have some way of ascertaining whether or not you achieved the goal, right? And it should be realistic. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't have stretch goals. You should have stretch goals, but they should be realistic. What would be a stretch goal? Well, I think I started talking about this last time, and then I had to end because I ran out of time. Most of you will not graduate. We call it a 4-year degree, right? And most of you will not graduate in 4 years. And there's some reasons why that is true. Historically, people graduated with an undergraduate degree in 4 years. It now takes the average person from start to finish 5.5 years to complete an undergraduate degree. And why is that? Well, I think I told you when I went to college, my parents could afford it. It was $1,000 a semester to go here, or $1,500 a semester when I went to OU. and in tuition and fees. That's no longer the case. And so most of you have to work. And so, you know, if you said, I want to graduate, my mother graduated in 3 years. That may not be realistic. You could have a really unrealistic goal. I'm going to start to finish an undergraduate degree in two years. You couldn't do it. I just don't think you can physically do that, right? So it should be realistic. Not that you shouldn't have a stretch goal. What would be a good stretch goal? I want to graduate with a degree in professional sales from the University of Central Oklahoma in 4 years. At this point, that would be a good stretch goal, or 3.5 years or something like that. So they should be specific, measurable, and realistic. So the types of goals that you have are going to be individually, like for you, individually specific and organizationally dependent. So when we talk about, a lot of what we talk about are organizations in this class. I try to make it personal to you, but a lot of times the examples that are given in the book and that we'll look at are organizations. And because large organizations are easy to get data on, a lot of those will be what we focus on in examples in this class in marketing. So what are the types of organizations that we can have, and how does this affect what the goals are? Well, most of what we are going to focus on in this course are going to be for-profits. Now, recognizing again that, as I said before, marketing is a pervasive social activity, and it is the only fully integrated function of the firm. So individuals engage in marketing, but when we talk about firms, I gave you examples last time, or I started to give you examples, and I'll just recap these in case I didn't get through them all, of how you don't have to know anything about finance to start a business. You don't have to know anything about double entry bookkeeping, and you don't have to know anything about management to run a business. And I gave you the example of the guy down, the lawyer whose office was basically the shoe shine stand at the Oklahoma County Courthouse, and he would answer the payphone, and he didn't have to understand anything. I think he probably did about finance, capital structure, whether it's debt or equity. Didn't have to understand double entry bookkeeping. You know, now you can pay your taxes using TurboTax. You don't have to understand double entry bookkeeping to do that, right? You just tell TurboTax, it starts asking you questions, and you just start answering the questions. How much money did you make? Do you have any W-2s, any 1099s, things like that? And he didn't have to manage anybody. So marketing is the only fully integrated function of the firm. Lots of what we're going to look at are going to be for-profits. What are for-profits? Well, the goal of a for-profit is to make money. But other organizations use marketing as well. Nonprofits. An example of a nonprofit is, and one that's going to be relevant rapidly in this country probably again, is the American Red Cross. What is the goal of the Red Cross, and why do I say it's rapidly going to be relevant again in this country?
Red Cross helps, like, they come and help us, like, after a tornado. And
right, they do this, that's exactly it. They do disaster relief, and why is that going to be terribly relevant? We're going to start seeing ads and things like that for the Red Cross again, and then we're going to start seeing them in news because what's happening? Well, there's COVID, but there's also what? Hurricanes, yeah, and somebody in the extended class said hurricanes in Louisiana. There are one hurricane and one tropical storm, I believe, in the Gulf Coast in Louisiana. And so they are going to be, and again, I sanitize the ducks from the last month, in case you're terribly afraid. If you don't want to touch the ducks, you can just remember to come up. It's just a way of making sure that you do come up, because people forget, they run out because they've got another class. And so this way I get my ducks back, because you don't want to carry around a stupid duck all day, right? So the hurricanes in Louisiana and the Gulf Coast are going to be relevant. What is their goal? Well, their goal is not to make a profit. It's to what? It's to help people that are experiencing disaster situations. And so they deal with that. Governments, again, use marketing. The goal of the United States government is to provide services to its people. It does that through a variety of departments, and they engage in marketing. During World War II, Americans generally were pretty isolationist. We didn't want to get involved in World War II. And so in order to get people to support the war, they came up with propaganda films. Lots of old-time movie actors went into the military and they made films for the government. that were basically advertisement or marketing pieces for the government. So it's going to be dependent on the type of organization. Now, when we talk about for-profit, since that's the vast majority that we're going to be looking at, there are different types, and your goals are going to be, again, dependent upon what type of organization you have. Are you the simplest type of organization is a DBA or a sole proprietorship? This requires nothing in terms of formality of organizing the business. Again, you can do this without letting anybody know. You can go out and start a business. And I point this out, you cannot start a law business. So you cannot, when we talk about this, confuse the ease of starting the business from an organizational standpoint with the substantive law that may be required for the type of business you want to run. So I can start a law practice by going down and hanging out at the courthouse. And I suggested to you, you could try an experiment. You can't carry it through to completion, but put on a suit, go down to the courthouse and hang around, and people will start asking you if you're a lawyer, right? And you could, in theory, start. You can't because you don't have a law degree and haven't passed the bar. That's the substantive law that governs lawyers. You have to be a lawyer to actually engage in the practice of law. But I can start that business without going to the state of Oklahoma and saying, hey, I'm opening an office. It's going to be called Granite Geary's Really Good Law Firm. I can just go down and hang out at the courthouse and start taking in clients. I don't have to do anything, don't have to notify anybody, don't have to file any paperwork to do that, right? You can start lots of businesses this way. One of my first students, when I transferred from the College of Liberal Arts to the College of Business years and years and years ago, was the student who came and saw me. He said, I got my first job offer from my bachelor's degree, and I said, that's great. They offered me a position as a marketing specialist at a firm, and I can't remember what the company was in Oklahoma City at the time, and the starting salary is $30,000 a year. And this was back in the 90s, and I said, that is really, really good. And he said, yeah, the problem is that when I was in high school, I started a lawn mowing business here in Edmond, and last year I made $200,000. And I said, well, if your degree at UC taught you anything, it's that you need to continue to mow yards, right? So the reason I tell you this story is because he started this lawn business. His father bought him a mower, a weed eater, and an edger. And he started out, he didn't have a truck or a trailer. He started out just by mowing his neighbors, the people that he could walk to their houses here in Edmond. He started mowing their yards. And it grew and it grew and it grew. He bought a truck and a trailer. And by the time he was my student, he actually ran like a bunch of crews here in Edmond mowing yards. And you don't have to, he didn't go down and file anything with the Secretary of State to do that. He just started a lawn business. You might decide that you and somebody else can do more work together, and that might make you more profitable. I could decide that there's another lawyer out there. I know a lot about, for example, contract law. I know a lot about employment law, and I used to practice intellectual property fairly frequently, so I know a lot about that. I might team up with somebody who knows something about environmental law, and we might decide that together we can make more money and we'll start a partnership, right? We've got a synergy there, and so the goal is then to make more money by having a partnership, and again, we don't have to file any paperwork to do that. The standard type, though, is the one that you want is probably to be a corporation of some form. Now, there are many corporate forms and they're state dependent, but basically the corporation allows you to pool large amounts of money, large amounts of capital, and limit the liability of the owners or the shareholders. Now, there are various types that this can take. For example, in Oklahoma, you can have a limited liability corporation, which is more like a partnership than it is a formal corporation, where you have a limited number of people, but it limits your liability, but it's still a corporate form. You can have a limited liability partnership, right? That's another form. Or you can have the traditional form of corporation where you have sort of a board of directors and shareholders and all of that. The larger you get, the more complex the goals become. And the more you have to engage in maybe long-term planning. Although I would argue, you all should engage in long-term planning. It's amazing to me how many of my students get to the end of their senior year and they're like, I guess I better start looking for a job. That generally doesn't happen, by the way, with my sales students, because most of them have done internships by that point in time. We require either the practicum or the internship. And so you have some experience that you've gotten out there and you've gotten contact with people, and most of them go to work for the people that they do their internship at. But lots of my students in the past have gotten, I guess I better start looking for a job. Maybe you should start planning that now and thinking about those kinds of things now. So strategy, long term, and structural dimensions. Now, a lot of foreign corporations look at American corporations and say we don't focus on the long term. We have a tendency, because of some reporting requirements. Once you become a big corporation, you have to report to the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and you have to file something called a 10Q, and then at the end of the year, a 10K. And that gives basically a profit and loss statement. It's more complicated than that. I did that when I was a corporate general counsel for the company that I worked for. And so a lot of times, American corporations are accused of focusing only on short-term goals because of the numbers that are reported in those documents, and for a variety of other reasons. But generally speaking, we want to think about long-term strategies and then more short-term strategies. And then the structural dimensions, from broad to narrow. So we have various types of entities. Large corporations have oftentimes underneath them, they become umbrella corporations, and they have strategic business units. So one of my favorite big corporations, I'm going to mute this for 1 second, is Berkshire Hathaway. And in my morning class, I'm not going to pull this up because I need the board and I can't move too far, so that the people in the online section or in the extended classroom can see what I'm doing. One of my favorite corporations to talk about is Berkshire Hathaway, because it's chaired by a man named Warren Buffett, who is known as the Oracle of Omaha, who is one of my heroes. And Berkshire Hathaway stock today, I looked at the price in my morning class. I would pull it up here, but again, I'm trying to make sure that the extended section can see as well. And it gets a little difficult if I'm going back and forth and trying to do this. A Class A share of Berkshire Hathaway selling for $318,000 today, one share of Berkshire stock. So Berkshire is a big umbrella corporation. I think their BRK is their stock. What does Berkshire own? And in case you can't see it in the online or the extended class, let me turn those lights off as well, and maybe it'll be. There used to be some dimmer. There we go. That makes it a little better. Turn that off. Does that, anybody out there tell me if that's less glare and you can see the board? If not, I'll repeat this multiple times. So Berkshire is an umbrella corporation. What does Berkshire own? Well, a few of the companies that you may have heard of that Berkshire owns as the umbrella corporation are Geico. What does Geico sell? Insurance. What does Geico stand for? Anybody know? Government Employee Insurance Corporation. That's what they started out as, selling insurance, sort of like USAA sells only to the armed services and certain other uniformed branches of government. Thank you, I appreciate the feedback. You said you can see it. Geico, so they are the parent corporation of Geico, Dairy Queen, Nebraska Furniture. Anybody been to Nebraska and Plano? It's huge. Did you go to the one in Plano?
Well, there's one in Kansas City, that's where I'm from.
There's one in Kansas City. I don't know. I've never been to the one in Kansas City. The one in Plano makes Mathis Brothers Furniture look anemic. I mean, it's huge. It has literally got a parking garage that is 8 stories tall, and it's like this huge building, and they've got everything that you can possibly imagine for sale in Nebraska Furniture Mart. So that's another one. C's Candies, I believe, is another Berkshire Hathaway. Now, when we talk about from broad to narrow, Berkshire's goals, their broad goals, are going to be to increase shareholder wealth. Duracell batteries. I didn't know Duracell batteries was owned by Berkshire. That's interesting. They've got a lot of companies, right? So their overall strategy is going to be to increase that share price from 318,000 to more than that, right? That's what they're going to look for. Long-term investment strategies. When you get to these strategic business units, what's Geico's goal going to be, would you guess? Ultimately, I mean, they're not concerned about Berkshire's share price as much as they are what? What does Geico want to do? Sell more insurance policies, right? Sell more auto insurance. What does Dairy Queen want to do? Well, they want to increase market share. Probably their goal, if I could guess, is to increase market share in the fast food industry, and they don't have a huge market share. However, what they do have is they have a very loyal market share, right? I mean, people who like Dairy Queen really like Dairy Queen. In Texas, there's a saying that Dairy Queen are Texas stop signs. They're red Dairy Queen style. That's a Texas stop sign. Texans love Dairy Queen. So Nebraska Furniture is going to be to sell more furniture this quarter than we did last quarter, and See's Candy is the same, right? And then when we go down below that to the functional level, you're going to have organizational goals, or at the functional level, you know, what is an individual Dairy Queen's goal? Well, it's going to be to make sure that they have sufficient staffing for that restaurant, that they, you know, are open, and that they, you know, sell more than they did last year, sell more hamburgers than they did last year. So from this broad to sort of a more narrow focus, depending on where you are in that large organization, is going to depend on the kind of strategy. These functional are going to focus much more on short-term strategy. You know, what are we going to do in the next 6 months? How are we going to increase business at our local Dairy Queen in the next 6 months? How are we going to make sure that we have sufficient staffing to meet needs? You know, when COVID came along, lots and lots of fast food restaurants did really well because it was one of the few places you could still go and drive through. How are we going to use that to our advantage? You know, to increase business here at Dairy Queen 539 or whatever. So from broad to narrow, and from long term to short term. Long-term success. Jim Collins and Jerry Porras did a study of 18 companies, and they wrote a book called Built to Last: Successful Habits of Visionary Companies. What they found is that these companies had been, on average, in business over 100 years. And so they wanted to look at these companies that had long track records to determine what were the sort of the key ingredients that made them successful. What they found was that these companies outperformed the market, and one of the things that helped them outperform the market were a set of core values. Now, this is useful to you as well. As you think about your goals and your strategies for achieving those goals, I think you should think about, what are your core values? What is it that you really want in life? When I was a younger man, it was very important to me. I mean, I wanted to be a big building lawyer, and I wanted to be a millionaire by the time I was 30. I became a big building lawyer. I became a corporate general counsel, an executive vice president. I became a big building lawyer, and I made an astronomical amount of money. I will tell you that after doing that for 5 years, my values changed. I realized that I made a lot of money, but I had no time to spend it. When my brother got married, my brother at the time he was living in New York. He is a vice president and a tax attorney for Goldman Sachs. And I went to my boss and I said, my brother's getting married. I'm his best man. I'm going to take off. The entire time I worked there, I'd never taken vacation. And I said, I'm going to take a week's vacation off. That is completely unacceptable. You cannot take off that amount of time. And I said, well, I'm going to, because it's my brother's wedding and I'm his best man and I don't live there. And, there are certain duties that the best man has and you're supposed to help with the wedding and get, I'm going to go. And I realized at that point that money was not the most important thing to me. Right? And shortly after that experience, when I came back, I decided I was going to go return to higher education by getting a PhD because my values had changed. It was I no longer really was all that interested in making a lot. It didn't mean a lot to me to make a lot of money if you had no time to spend it or enjoy it or do things with family. So my values changed. So your values will probably change as well as you go through life. So you think about these values that you have, enduring principles that you're passionate about. Turns out that to be successful, though, at least in the corporate world, you don't necessarily have to have good values. Just that you have strong values. They don't have to be what we might consider qualitatively good values. Two of the companies that they juxtapose in this study, now one of them has gotten sort of a bad rap in recent times, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about ethics, and I'll also talk a little bit about it today. Philip Morris versus Johnson & Johnson. Philip Morris manufactures cigarettes. The CEO of Philip Morris was quoted as saying, I see nothing wrong. They described him as cunning, ruthless, and arrogant. And he said, I see nothing wrong with selling people something that they don't need. Well, there is a huge difference between selling people something they don't need and something that is a priori bad for you. There is nothing, and I say this as somebody, I quit smoking about 20 years ago, and it was hard. I mean, it was really, really hard. Nobody loved to smoke more than I did. And I quit. But there is no benefit to smoking, right? I loved it. It kept me calm. I gained a lot of weight when I quit smoking. But it's not just that it's not necessary. It is actively bad for you. And he refused to acknowledge that smoking causes cancer. And it's not just lung cancer. It's all kinds of cancers. It increases your likelihood, if you're a man, of developing prostate cancer. If you're a woman, of developing breast cancer. And men can develop breast cancer. There are all of these things it causes gum cancer. Right? It also causes emphysema, COPD. It is not good for you. As opposed to Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson has in recent times become under some criticism because of their participation in the opioid manufacturing, and they've been sued. Oklahoma, I believe, is one of the ones that sued them. But fundamentally, I think their core values are pretty good. And I will And I recognize for those of you in the extended section, you probably can't see this. They can't see it really well in here, so I will read it. You can find it simply by Googling Johnson & Johnson's credo. Our credo, we believe our first responsibility is to the patients, doctors, and nurses, to mothers and fathers, and all others who use our products and services. In meeting their needs, everything we must do must be of high quality. We must consistently strive to provide value, reduce costs, maintain reasonable prices. Customers' orders must be serviced promptly and accurately. Our business partners must have an opportunity to make a fair profit. We are responsible to our employees who work with us throughout the world. We must provide an inclusive work environment where each person must be considered as an individual. We must respect diversity and dignity and recognize their merit. They must have a sense of security, fulfillment, and purpose in their jobs. Compensation must be fair and adequate, and working conditions clean, orderly, and safe. We must support the health and well-being of our employees and help them fulfill their family and personal responsibilities. Employees must feel free to make suggestions and complaints. There must be equal opportunity for employment. Development and advancement for those who qualify. We must provide highly capable leaders, and their actions must be just and ethical. We are responsible to the communities in which we live and work, and the world community as well. We must help people be healthier by supporting better access and care in more places around the world. We must be good citizens, support good works and charities, better health and education, and bear our fair share of taxes. We must maintain in good order the property we are privileged to use, protecting the environment and our natural resources. Our final responsibility is to our stockholders. Businesses must make a sound profit. We must experiment with new ideas. Research must be carried on, innovative programs developed, investments made for the future, and mistakes paid for. New equipment must be purchased, new facilities provided for, and new products launched. Reserves must be created to provide for adverse times. And when we operate according to these principles, the stockholders should realize a fair return. Notice stockholders are mentioned last in Johnson & Johnson's credo. That's not without controversy. Milton Friedman would say they should be mentioned first because business's first obligation is to make a profit. But as a result of really, I think, focusing on that credo and how they can fulfill that mission, they've become an enduring company. Johnson & Johnson is the manufacturer of Tylenol. In the 1980s, Tylenol's capsules were compromised and people were dying. They put cyanide, somebody tampered with them and put cyanide in the capsules, and people were dying. Johnson & Johnson instantly pulled all of that product off the shelf. And they fixed the problem at great expense. And so this mission statement comes from these ideas of enduring principles and values. In that, we have to ask what it is we do. Theodore Levitt, one of the early marketing scholars, marketing theorists, says one of the things that we must do is we must avoid becoming myopic. We borrow a lot of terms in marketing from other disciplines. Myopic comes from the world of vision. If somebody is myopic, it means that they can only see things. Most of us are slightly myopic. I'm pretty myopic. I can't see anything out there without my glasses or contacts. And so I'm pretty myopic. Theodore Levitt says we have to avoid marketing myopia. We have to be able to see the forest for the trees. One of the examples that he gives in that is at the beginning of the 20th century, some of the largest companies in America were railroad companies. By the way, one of the largest companies that Berkshire owns is Burlington Northern Santa Fe. These companies, a lot of them went broke because they were really good at being railroad companies, and they didn't realize that the broader field in which they operated was not being a railroad company. They were really involved in what? Transportation. And the companies that really succeeded are those that realize that they're transportation companies. FedEx doesn't just ship stuff by railroad. They don't just ship stuff by air or by truck. They are an intermodal transportation company, right? So understanding that you have to realize what your field is. My family's business, my family owns 4 bed and breakfasts in Guthrie, Oklahoma. My mother started these in 1986. We were the first bed and breakfast. And we were remarkably unsuccessful at the beginning because nobody knew what a bed and breakfast was in Oklahoma. We opened up the first one. And people would show up and they would think they were staying at a hotel, and they'd say, well, this is a house. And my mother would say, yes, that's what bed and breakfast is. It's you're staying in a lovely old Victorian mansion. I don't want to stay in your house. So my mother started writing murder mysteries, and we started doing murder mystery weekends. And we realized rapidly that we weren't really in the bed and breakfast business. We were in the entertainment business. That's what we're in. We're in the entertainment and hospitality business. It's about more than just renting rooms, right? So avoiding marketing myopia is going to be really, really important. So strategies. The Boston Consulting Group came up with this 2x2 matrix, depending on whether or not there was growth potential, whether there was low or high growth potential, and whether or not you had high or low market share in that. Obviously, what you want to be is you want to be a star, but stars generally fade after a while, right? So you have to think about where you are in this matrix and how you want to maneuver through it. Most products start out as a question mark. If you're lucky, they become a star, and then a cash cow, and then ultimately you divest. So question marks. You want to choose your products wisely based on good and sound marketing research. Even that may lead to failure, and I give you an example of that in New Code. Most products will start out as question marks. Now, Apple was not the first, they were one of the first to launch a digital music device. I know this seems like ancient history, although it's coming back. But when I was a kid growing up, most people had a stereo system, and that stereo system involved a turntable. I had one of these. I had a stereo system that had a turntable, and people bought vinyl records, and you played vinyl records on your stereo. I am amazed at how this is making a comeback, because I look back on those days and I think, God, it was hard to play. I mean, you couldn't put together songs that you like. I have very eclectic taste in music, and so I, oftentimes want to listen to, some hip hop tune followed by Metallica's Unforgiven or something like that. And my playlists are all over the chart. When I put together a playlist, but that's not the way I listened to music as a kid. As a kid, we had records, and they were better quality sound. They also had cassettes. They had 8 tracks when I was a kid. Those didn't last very long. Then they came out with the cassettes. But a lot of people bought vinyl because the sound was much better, and it lasted if you took care of it. Tapes are very fragile. These cassettes that we used to play were pretty fragile. Vinyl would last a lot. You can still get old vinyl that sounds really good if it's been protected, right? And this is making a comeback. How many of you have gone out and bought a vinyl turntable? Okay, a couple of you. It's sort of a novelty that's coming back. And so you listen to records on your stereo with a turntable, and then there was these cassettes, and that was better than the turntable because you could put it in your car. You could take it with you, right? Still not great because you couldn't come up with your own list. You had to listen to the music that was on the cassette. They did come up with a way in the late 1990s of being able to repeat a song on your car stereo. I actively collect vinyl. I have over 400 records. Wow. I didn't realize anybody was that passionate about vinyl in today's world, but I guess they are, yeah.
I have like 80. It's not 400, but I'm getting up there.
I probably had, when I got rid of them all, and I sort of regret it now, I probably had 200 at one point in time. So these cassettes, you could take them with you, you could put them in the car, and they came out with a way you could just hit a reverse button and replay the song if you wanted to, and I'd replay songs over and over and over again until I got sick of listening to them. You could also record the music. Yeah, you could do that on my stereo. You could go from the vinyl. You could record it. You could hit the record button and record it on the cassette, and then take it with you. Then they came out with CDs, which were even much better because now you could go to songs very quickly on the CD. And they initially came out and they said, these are great because they don't scratch, they don't, and they did. You could scratch them and they wouldn't play after a while. But they were better than tapes, they were better than vinyl, I guess. And then they started out with digital. I don't think Apple was the first, they were not the first one to come out with a digital music player, but they were the ones who made it popular. They were early adopters of this technology, and they came out with the iPod, right? That started out as a question mark. People were committed, cars came with CD players, and some cars, you can still buy cars with CD players. There's still some new models of cars that have CD players in them. I think Honda makes one, a few others. My current truck does not have a CD player in it. You just have to either play radio, satellite, or use your iPod or iPad or your now phone. People were committed to these CD things, and there's a lot of switching costs, and so it was a question mark. But Apple successfully marketed this thing called the iPod, and it took off like crazy. They started installing auxiliary jacks in cars so that you could play your iPod when you're in a car. Nobody does. You all don't even know about auxiliary jacks because you don't remember that because, why would you do that? You got Bluetooth, right? But that was a question mark. It rapidly became a star. As this device became more and more integrated, and the iPod, does anybody have an iPod anymore? Why would you need that? You've got this. Why have two devices? Why do you have that? Why would you have that?
I just leave it in my car so it's already there when I turn it on because I listen to a lot of different musicals, and so switching between CDs is a mess for me. And it's easier just to leave it in my car and remember it's there.
But you've got this.
I know, but I don't like using that.
You've got, this has got everything in it now, doesn't it? Right? I'm going to give you bonus points for defending the iPod because it's like that's ancient technology. Why would you do this? Crazy. You now have this device, right? So that went from being a star to being a cash cow, and now, do they even manufacture iPods anymore?
No.
I don't think so. I bet they do. I bet they still manufacture them for developing nations. There are probably still places that still have them. But this is now the star Apple product, right? So question marks, you hope that it will become a star. Stars generally become cash cows. Cash cows then allow you to harvest them and provide money. You can still buy the Nano everywhere. I didn't realize that. So apparently you can still buy it. I had not realized that was still out there. So cash cows provide money. Dogs, low market share, low growth. You need to divest or may require divesting of those in order to continue on. I used to do this, and I'm probably going to do this as a critical thinking challenge because I have that as a component of the grade. I used to do this on the first day. I would give out a piece of paper and I'd have everybody list 3 strengths on it, and then I would have you get into groups and develop a brand identity based on your strengths of your group members. Businesses engage in SWOT analysis and doing the strategic planning, right? There are 2 components of the SWOT that are internal and 2 that are external. What are our strengths and what are our weaknesses? And I used to have students come up with strengths. Now, one of the things that I will tell you in the critical thinking challenge that I'll probably put out, and I will create a Dropbox or an assignment now, it's called Assignments on D2L, for you to do this, is come up with your strengths. And I'm going to tell you the one thing that you can't say is that I'm a hard worker, probably because it's not true. The studies show that your generation is just not hard. My generation, I'm a Gen Xer, we are not hard workers. And even if you are a hard worker, that may not be a virtue. I'll give you an example. I grew up on a cattle ranch. So I have an agricultural background. If you have 60 acres and you're out there with your horse and plow or your mule and your plow, you may be working hard and you are a prime candidate for natural deselection. because that's not the way we farm today. You are going to go broke and starve to death. If that, you may be working really hard, but it's not going to get you very far, right? So start thinking about your strengths, your weaknesses. The company I worked for, our strengths were, oh, I got a typo there. Our strengths were that we were really the cheapest product. We were the cheapest learning management system out there for the K-12 market. We had a really good backbone. Our weakness was that because we were the smallest of the big boy publishers, of the publicly traded companies that did this, our weakness was that we couldn't be flashy. We couldn't have all the bells and whistles that Plato and Riverdeep had in their learning management systems. And as a result, our company was headquartered, we were a publicly traded company, we were headquartered right down here in Broadway Extension. We were bought out by K-12. You all have probably seen K-12's advertisements. They do a lot of virtual schools, virtual high schools. That's who bought us, because they wanted our backbone. Fuel Dad is also a K-12 product. So we couldn't sell. We were located right down here in Broadway. We couldn't sell, as far as I remember, into Edmond schools, because Edmond's a wealthy school district, and they wanted the LMSs that had more whiz-bang stuff to them than we could provide. That was our weakness. So we played to our strengths. Who did we sell to? We sold to smaller school districts. We sold to school districts that didn't have as many resources. And a big one, we sold to prisons. Because lots of prisons need to educate people, and this was a way of doing it. We had a very good, strong product in a LAN and WAN, so we could deliver it. Didn't have to be delivered online. So those were our strengths. We had weaknesses. External opportunities and threats. What out there is an opportunity? How can we make money? How can we expand our market share? What are the threats? What's a big threat to business today? What? COVID-19. Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge threat. How are we going to maintain our business in an age in which people are having to experience, who said that? Oh, you said, I'm sorry, but you said it. In which people have to maintain social distancing. Competition is a big threat, right? The more competition you have, that can be a threat in a market. That's from the extended section. So what are our opportunities? What are our threats? COVID, these are things that we can't necessarily control, but we can respond to. Technology, somebody said technology could be a threat. Absolutely. Technology is a huge threat to a lot of businesses because it can put them out of business. Something like, to go along with that, market saturation, someone else said that. To go back to the technology point, I was listening to NPR coming into work a few years ago, and on NPR they were talking about the workforce of tomorrow and the fact that 50% of the jobs in existence at that point in time, this was 3 or 4 years ago, 50% of the jobs they estimated would be eliminated in 10 to 15 years. And I was willing to sort of buck that. You know, I mean, as an academic, you hear these theories put out there, and your instant reaction is to say, well, that can't be correct. And then I went to Sam's for my family's business. I pick up groceries for my family's business, and I went to Sam's, and they had this. This is a Friosk. We have been going to Sam's to pick up stuff for 36 years. And I've done this every Friday for my family's business for 36 years, just about. And I love going to Sam's. I always volunteered. I was, you know, early on when we started going to Sam's, when we started developing this business, the minute I got a driver's license, I would volunteer to go. And one of the reasons I liked to go to Sam's was You got all these samples of free stuff. You got to try all the food out. And they would hand you all these samples of all this other stuff as well. Well, they no longer have as many people standing out there handing you samples of stuff because they have the free offs. You scan your card and it gives you a sample. And why is this great? Why is this better than a human being? It doesn't get sick. It doesn't call in. And one of the reasons I loved to go to Sam's in the past was I would get more than one sample. You could have a whole little lunch at Sam's. Just keep walking by. It gives you one sample. That's it. It's more efficient. Somebody online says it's more efficient. One sample, don't have to have a human being, doesn't call in sick, doesn't require health care. Once you pay for it, it's there. You don't have any costs associated with it, right? I mean, this is great. So 50% of the jobs may be not in existence in 15 years. That's what they were predicting. So that's a threat, to you. Why is it you're getting a college education? Why are you sitting here on a Tuesday listening to me drone on and on and on about marketing strategies when you'd rather be doing something else, I'm sure. I had one student in my student evaluation say, "You're not funny." Yes, I am. I am hysterically funny. So we can just get that out of the way. But in spite of the fact that, a lot of this is the Granny Geary Comedy Hour, there's still things you'd probably rather be doing with your time. Like, sleeping, right? Rather than showing up. My first class is at 8 o'clock. I feel sorry for those people. I am up at 5 a.m. every morning, no matter what. So, I like 8 a.m. classes. Everybody in that class, they like just walk in dragging. 9:30 is sort of your homage to the fact that you can't actually get up. But so external opportunities and threats. How do we deal with those? How do we overcome them? Hopefully you have the strengths to deal with these and change and adapt. Any questions about that? All right. Hopefully by next time I'll have this figured out so we can just go back to this and I won't have to scroll down. Environmental scanning. This goes along. This is the external part of the SWOT analysis, scanning the environment to identify opportunities and threats and be able to respond to threats and take advantages of opportunities. How do we do that? Well, we do it through environmental scanning. So, marketing is a dynamic discipline as opposed to a static discipline. Now, there are very few things that are static. However, as I've told you all before, I started out as a liberal arts faculty member, and I often look back fondly on the days of, maybe I should have been a historian, because that is largely a static discipline. If you teach, for example, American history from 1776 to the Civil War, or, from colonial times to the Civil War, we know what happened. Now, we may uncover new evidence that changes some of our perspectives on that time, but by and large, we know what happened. We know that there was the country was founded and we started out, we didn't have the United States of America under a constitution. We had something, and you should remember this from your American history classes, we had something called the Articles of Confederation. We know that happened. And what was that? We had 13 independent states that were loosely associated after the Revolutionary War, or after the War of Independence, whatever they're calling it. Historians, because it's a static discipline, they like to change the names of things to show that they're still doing something, I guess. So we no longer call it the Civil War. Historians now call it the war between the states. Well, what is the war between? That's a civil war. By political science definitions, that's a civil war. But we're going to call it, but we know who won that war. Right? I mean, that's static. We know that. Marketing is not like that. And I'm not terribly good at technology, as you can tell. I mean, I've got like 5 different things going here, and I'm probably not doing any of them terribly well. I can't seem to figure out how to get this stupid thing to stop splitting the screen with the PowerPoint and condense it onto one. So, a lot of times when things like this happen, I think, geez, I should go back to being a historian. There are still historians over there, some of my older colleagues, that the last time I went over to the land of hippy dippy, they were still using overhead projectors and their transparencies from the 1970s. You've never even seen an overhead projector. I said that in one of my classes, and then one of my students said, yeah, I'm in fashion marketing, and they still use overhead projectors in fashion. Really? Are you in fashion marketing?
Yeah.
I was like,
Like the old ones where it's like
The-
big Colombian,
it's the
they
clear-
lay the paper down.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, I said that you've probably never seen an overhead projector, and then I had a student say, yeah, I'm in fashion marketing, and Dr.
Miller.
Miller still uses like to show textiles,
Oh, Dr.
Oh, that was Dr. Mattis, yeah, she retired, but yeah, she used it.
and I'm like, really? You
She
can see
didn't like technology.
Yeah, she does it all.
you can see textiles on this device, right? So somebody over there still, even though Dr. Ness is retired, somebody is still using transparencies.
Dr. Miller, she rarely does, but every now and then she has these old examples that she likes, and then she brings them out in one class once a year, and that's it. But she likes technology more.
Okay.
It was an entire class of just those, and you were like, cool. And then she had to angle it because it would always be half off. Yeah.
It was
Right.
a process.
Yeah. Yeah. They came out with a device to deal with that, so you could still use your transparencies or whatever. It was called an Elmo. You don't even see those anymore. And the Elmo it was a document camera, and it would display it up here. But yeah, I went over there, and there were some historians that have been there for 1,000 years, and they're still using these old yellow transparencies on and over, and I'm like, wow. But when I'm having problems with the technology, sometimes I wish I could go back to doing, oh, okay. 3 branches of government: executive, legislative, judicial. I can lay it on a transparency, right? So isn't that cool? So marketing is a dynamic discipline. It's constantly changing. I'm constantly having to come up with all kinds of things. Learn how to navigate WebEx, YouTube. I've done YouTube for a long time in my classes, but WebEx, YouTube, texting from students in the extended section, watching to see if anybody is sending any messages on, which I gotta go back to that, on the chat, on YouTube. So it's highly dynamic. What are the sources of this dynamicism for marketers? What is it that we have to look at? Well, generally we say there's 5 things. We need to look at social, economic, technological, competitive, and regulatory forces. So we'll look at all of these and talk a little bit about all of them. So we've got social, economic, technology, competitive, and regulatory. Social forces. What are some of the social forces that are impacting us? Well, demographics are a basic social force that impacts us. So what's happening worldwide? The population of the world is increasing. It's getting bigger. That presents a huge opportunity, doesn't it? And opportunities can also be threats. So what are the opportunities that go along with this expanding world population? What does that mean for us if the population is getting bigger on a worldwide scale? Well, it could mean that there's more people to sell to. Probably means there are more people to sell to. Now, unfortunately, a lot of those people don't have the resources to buy a lot of what we make because they're in developing countries. the world population growth is not being experienced by most industrialized or post-industrial, and we are now a post-industrial society. It's not being experienced by most post-industrial societies are actually decreasing or staying steady in their population. The United States is one of the few industrial countries that is actually experiencing some growth, but it's not as big as it was, and we'll talk about why that is. So somebody said in the extended class, scarce resources are getting scarcer. That is true. The population, so this is how population growth, it's an opportunity for us to sell more stuff. It's also a threat because scarce resources are we are doing colossal damage to our environment. And that's a threat. How are we going to continue to live on this planet and market sustainably if we're degrading the environment, right? And so it's both an opportunity and a threat. The US, it's not necessarily that we're growing. We are growing, but the only reason we're really growing is because of immigration. Countries like, I believe, Norway, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, I think Denmark may be holding steady, but Norway, Sweden, Finland, the Netherlands are experiencing negative population growth. Why is that? They don't have a lot of people. If you've ever been, which I have been, to Norway, Finland, Sweden, and the Netherlands, they are pleasant places to live. Yep, somebody in the extended class said it's too cold. Who wants to live? It's too cold. If you've been there in the wintertime, I was a foreign exchange student in Germany. That was way too cold. I don't really like our Oklahoma winters, and our Oklahoma winters are actually fairly mild compared to some of the other places. So they don't have a lot of people wanting to immigrate to Norway, Sweden, Finland, the Netherlands. And their population is not having kids. Now, when I was a kid growing up, it was very unusual to find somebody who was an only child. Most people had siblings. And I believe for most of my life when I was growing up, the statistical average was that the average American family had 3.5 children. Now, I don't know how you have a half of a child, but if you do the averages, right? I mean, it's just math. If you do the averages, you end up with like 3.5 was the average for most of the time I was growing up. That is no longer the case. If you went back to the beginning of the 20th century, or even the 1940s and 50s, when we still had a large agricultural society, children are economic assets in that world. You needed them before Social Security and things like that. You needed kids. You started on a farm, and you had to pass the farm to your kids, and you hoped that they would take care of it enough that you would be able to live off of them when you got too old and sick to farm. So children were an economic asset. Once we become an industrialized society and we start engaging in things like child labor laws, children are no longer an economic asset. They are an economic, and I know, I always have students that say, "Ah, you're so mean to say that children are an economic liability." Well, they are. I don't have them. My brother wanted to have a lot of kids until he had one. And then he realized how expensive it was to have one kid. And that was before he realized how expensive it was to have one kid at the point before the kids started wanting things. Or kids always want things, like they need to be fed. But they really want a lot of stuff. My nephew has unlimited wants. Uncle Grant, can I have that? No. And then his wife talked him into another kid. But my brother wanted, he said he wanted 6 kids. Until he had one. And then he only wanted one. And his wife talked him into 2. Now what that means is I am not replacing myself, right? And this is not atypical. Lots of people are now, when I started teaching and I would say things like, I don't want children. They make me nervous. Students would say, you're a horrible person. And more, I now have students that say, I don't want kids. either. You know, most of you still want to have kids. I'm still, but I mean, literally, I would have students that would be very distressed when I would say, I don't want to have children. Like, I just don't want to have them. Why wouldn't you want to have a little, you? I fear that. Let me tell you, I know what type of child I was. No. So in places like Norway and Finland and Sweden, they're not having, and nobody's immigrating there, and their population is declining. Even though the overall world population is growing. In the US, what this means, we are still growing, but it's largely as a result of immigration. In the US, our population is getting older. It is becoming more diverse. And for the first time in history, generational cohorts, I put this, and we actually now have maybe 5 generations in the workforce. For the first time in history, it was historically speaking, it was you got sick and old pretty quickly and you didn't work much past 60. That's not the case anymore. We now have at least 4 generations and maybe 5. So we have traditionalists. Those are people that were my grandparents' age. Your grandparents may be boomers for many of you. So the traditionalists may be your great-grandparents, right? They're still having to work. A lot of them, their company's pension plans failed and they're still in the workforce. The company I worked for, the boss I worked for, was a traditionalist. And this presents challenges for marketers and for businesses. He was very much a traditionalist, and he would come down to my office and he'd say, I don't understand where Kevin and Yvonne are. Those were the 2 other vice presidents. They were both vice presidents of sales. I was the executive vice president of human resources and general counsel. And I would say, well, Jeff, they're out selling. Well, how can you be selling when you're not here? Well, he had a very traditionalist mindset, which was you sit at your desk and you put in 8 hours for 8 hours of pay. That's not the way we sell anymore. When my mother owned a real estate company in Santa Fe, New Mexico, she owned the 2nd largest real estate company in Santa Fe at one point in time. You went to an office every day and you sat and waited for the phone to ring. You put out signs in yards and you had a number on it, and people would call the office, and that's how they would get an appointment to see a house. That's not the way realtors sell houses anymore. That's not the way we sold product, was by sitting in the office and waiting for the phone to ring. We sold product by having our sales vice presidents go out in the field and demo the product to school districts. People don't sit in the office anymore and wait for the phone to ring. You have this thing here. Realtors, you don't even have to go to the office. It was, until about 5 years ago, realtors still met you at the office to sign the contracts on a house. You don't even do that in person anymore. We sign contracts for real estate online through electronic signatures. So we have traditionalists, we have boomers. Traditionalists work hard. They live to work. Boomers were sort of the first generation to want to work to live. My generation, Gen X, took that to an extreme. That we really only work to live. And, we don't really want to work all that hard. Then there are millennials, most of you are millennials, and there may be even the generation after millennials, which they've yet to name that generational cohort, but some of them are now in the workforce. They're in high school primarily. There are some that are starting college in the past 2 years, depending on who you listen to, how they divide up the generational cohort. But we've got at least 4, maybe 5 generations in the workforce. This presents a challenge for business because you've got people like traditionalists who are saying, like, where are they? And boomers who sort of still have that work ethic. And then there's my generation who is like, if I'm not being productive, you're paying me to do a job, and if I've done my job, why can't I go home? Why can't I work from home? And we're finding as a result of COVID that maybe more and more people actually can work from home than we thought in the past. That's a good place to stop. So we will pick up with that on Thursday. I'm going to stop this. I just reposted in the discussion, my phone number for those of you who are watching it on YouTube that asked. For those of you on WebEx, thanks for watching. I'm gonna shut that out now.
Yeah, I just saw it on there. I was like, oh, the camera's moving.
What?
The camera in the bedroom.
Yeah, let me stop the live stream. All right.